Candidates often have questions about whether this or that answer will be accepted as correct in listening part A. This video will answer those questions and make sure you know what you should and shouldn't do in your test to get the best score you possibly can. To make the advice as clear as possible, I will be using the sample test 3 from the OET website, and you can see the link to this test in the video description. If you have already attempted this sample test, you might like to pause the video to find your answers so you can check them against the tips I'm about to give you. Listening Part A is designed to test your ability to record patient history details in real time. You will hear a healthcare professional conducting a consultation with the patient and will complete the healthcare professional's notes with relevant details. The real-life skill this part of the test is helping you to develop is in being able to listen, filter what the patient is saying, and record just the information that a healthcare professional would value. The surrounding notes on your question paper mean that the answers are clearly cued, and you only need to write a word or short phrase that you hear without making any changes to it at all. As you know, there are 2 extracts in Listening Part A, each containing part of an independent consultation between a healthcare professional and a patient. You need to write your answer in the space provided as you listen. For OET on computer at venue or OET at home, you will type the answer in the space provided. We're going to go through sample test 3 questions and candidate answers, and by the end of the video, you should be feeling completely confident about how to succeed in listening part A. Let's start with extract 1. The answer for question 1 is correct. Always ask yourself as a healthcare professional if the response you have written is sufficient for you to make an assessment about the patient's condition. For paired body parts, for example, knees, shoulders, hands, you would expect to specify whether the right or left or both are affected. The answer for question 2 is not correct and would score the candidate 0. The candidate's answer is incomplete. Both insect and bite are critical words because without either word, the relevant information is not accurately recorded. Always ask yourself if the response makes sense in the overall context of the notes you are completing. Adjectives can help healthcare professionals understand the condition better. The answer for question 3 is not correct and would score the candidate 0. While it's clear that the candidate has identified the correct word from the audio, they have not spelt the answer correctly. This is a word widely accessible to the general public and therefore quite common. Candidates would be expected to spell it correctly. Think about healthcare-related adverts, brochures, or magazines available to the non-medical public. What medical words would a layperson, a non-medical person, know? Other examples that accurate spelling would be expected for are high blood pressure, temperature, diabetes, carbohydrates, protein. The answers for questions 4 and 5 are not correct and would score the candidate 0. The candidate has not listened carefully enough to the audio. Really serious in question 4 is not describing the pain, but the type of condition the patient thought the pain might be a sign of. And in question 5, I could only just manage to walk has the meaning that the action is possible, but with difficulty, instead of was unable to, which means no ability to perform the action at all. Always read the question carefully and think about it in the real-life context. How do patients describe pain? What does the prefix "un" mean? Remember that negatives can be shown without using "not." The answer for question 6 is correct. Always remember that this test assesses your listening skills rather than ability to interpret what you hear or demonstrate your medical knowledge. You must write what you hear and not paraphrase, even if the word has the same meaning as the answer. For example, blood poisoning here has the same meaning as septicemia, but blood poisoning is not said in the audio and so would score 0. The answer for question 7 is correct. If you attempted to write a chunk of information from the recording, e.g., play a bit of rugby, it is likely that you are not giving a correct response. The correct answer will always fit grammatically with the other words around it on the question paper. The answer for question 8 is not correct and would score the candidate 0. While it's clear that the candidate has identified the correct word in the audio for the answer, there is an obvious and critical difference between one anti-inflammatory tablet and a number of anti-inflammatories. The pronunciation in the audio is clear, so you would be expected to write the correct plural form for the answer. Pay attention to the pronunciation of word endings. Plural S carries important meaning for a healthcare professional when considering diagnosis or treatment. Other examples that correct endings would be expected for are a headache, headaches, a spasm, spasms, a home visit, home visits. The answer for question 9 is correct. Both British and American spelling conventions are accepted for OET when spelling words like diarrhea, but you are encouraged to use the same convention for clarity throughout the listening test. The answer for question 10 is correct. The medication method can be useful information for the listener. Pay attention to adjectives and consider if they enhance the noun you are recording as your answer. Question 11 has not been recorded accurately. The second word is illegible, and you would score the candidate 0. Assessment has to be objective to ensure fairness, so assessors cannot guess what you intended to write. Handwriting does not need to be beautiful, but your answers must be legible, so this is something you should check in the time provided for checking answers. If you are concerned about the legibility of your handwriting, you can write your answers in block capitals. The answer for question 12 is not correct. As the candidate included 2 answers, they did not demonstrate understanding of the question or audio and would score 0 for this question, even though they had included the correct answer as part of what they'd written. It's an important part of any test that you follow the instructions because it demonstrates you have understood and can meet the requirements. You must only record one answer to each question. Let's recap the tips from looking at the answers for extract 1. Provide complete answers that make grammatical sense with the surrounding words and provide the healthcare professional with sufficient detail to assess the condition. Pay attention to your spelling and the endings of words. Be as accurate as possible and use the time provided at the end of the test to check your answers. Only write words that you hear in the audio. Paraphrasing is not accepted even if the meaning is the same as the answer, because the test is for you to write what you hear. Make sure your answers are legible and you only write one answer. For extract 2, I'm going to show you a variety of answers candidates wrote for these questions. I'm going to suggest you pause the video to check each one against your own answers and decide why the answers on the screen are wrong or correct using those 4 pieces of advice that I've just given you. Then restart the video to check your ideas against my explanation. For some questions, more than one answer has been provided to give you more examples of the types of responses we typically see from candidates. For these questions, look at all the answers and decide if each one would be wrong or correct. Here is question 13. Pause the video and restart when you are ready to hear the explanation of why these answers, fatigue and jet lag, are wrong or correct. Fatigue is wrong because the candidate did not follow the instructions to write a word or short phrase that they heard in the audio and has made an assumption based on the words in front of the gap. Jet lag is wrong because the misspelling changes the meaning of the word and the term is common enough to be spelt correctly at the level of English proficiency OET candidates are working at. OET Listening Part A is carefully written to ensure fairness. It does not assess medical knowledge. Answers are based solely on what you hear. Make sure that you study the prompts and keywords and listen to the audio carefully. Here is question 14. Pause the video to consider why malaria is wrong or correct. Malaria is wrong because this is what the doctor suspects the patient has, which is actually included in the next line of notes. But the gap is for what the patient thinks is wrong with her and leads her to contact her GP. During the reading time before the audio plays, pay attention to the notes around the gaps for answers, which will point to who provided the information initially. For example, the patient, the healthcare professional he or she is speaking to, or another healthcare professional who the patient previously saw. And then make sure you consider this when listening to the audio and recording your answer. Here is question 15. Pause the video to consider why this answer is wrong or correct. Malarone is the correct answer, but how clear do you find the handwriting on this screen? If you didn't know what the answer was, would it still be clear for you? The M, R, and first E are not particularly legible, especially when compared with the same letters in answers 13 and 14. This would be marked incorrect. If you show your answers to a friend or colleague and they cannot tell you what word or phrase you have written, your handwriting is not legible enough, and this is something you should work to improve. Here is question 16. Pause the video to consider why sweating buckets, bleeding, diaphoresis, and perspiration are wrong or correct. All of these answer options are wrong. The only word needed for the answer is sweating. Adding buckets, commonly used in English to mean lots of something, e.g. buckets of love, is not in keeping with the professionalism of consultation notes and has already been covered by the addition of heavily at the end of the answer gap. Perspiration and diaphoresis have the same meaning, but are not what is heard in the audio. Bleeding is an inaccurate prediction from reading the notes and not listening to the audio. Don't make the task more difficult than it is. There is no need to record anything other than what is heard on the audio, so don't show off your medical knowledge here by swapping the term used in the audio for something more technical. Here is question 17. Pause the video to consider why splitting headache is wrong or correct. Question 17 is correct. The candidate has provided the relevant descriptor of the patient's symptom. Understanding the severity of the patient's headache is critical information for the assessment. At the same time, the candidate recognized that words like the most are subjective and not relevant to include. OET aims to replicate real-life scenarios in the test. Think like the healthcare professional that you are when recording your answers, and don't include redundant and subjective words that the patient includes around the facts of their synonyms. This is an important skill to learn for your workplace, being able to filter the facts from a patient's responses and only recording those. Here is question 18. Pause the video to consider why jaundice is wrong or correct. Question 18 is also correct. Here is question 19. Pause the video to consider why racing is wrong or correct. Racing is incorrect. This is a common word that follows a typical spelling pattern in English, removing E from the end of a single syllable word before adding ing, and candidates would be expected to spell this correctly. Revise typical spelling rules for English verbs before tense endings, ed, ing, are added. These are covered in foundation level English courses, so you are expected to be able to apply them accurately in OET. Here is question 20. Pause the video to consider why her eyes and my eyes are wrong or correct. Both her eyes and my eyes are wrong because they don't work with the word written before the gap. Her eyes because her is written already, and my eyes because my does not make sense in a healthcare professional's notes and is made irrelevant from her before the gap. I would also be incorrect because by writing the singular instead of the plural, it is inaccurate information about the patient's symptoms. As you would when listening to a real patient, pay attention to the specific detail they provide and record it accurately. Use the time you have for checking answers to check things like singular and plural nouns and recall if you have written what you heard in the audio. Here is question 21. Pause the video to consider why pain and appetite are wrong or correct. Pain is incorrect because it is insufficient in recording the specific location, abdominal. We allow discomfort because it is what the doctor has specifically asked about, and it would make sense to use the same word as part of the answer. We also allow pain because it is the language that the patient uses. There is no difference in meaning here, and both are heard in the recording. Remember, in the question paper, the notes reflect the doctor's perspective, but we accept the language that the patient uses. Appetite is incorrect because this is covered in the next bullet. While you are listening for an answer, don't just focus your eyes on the particular line containing the answer gap. Also look at the next line of notes. The words in this line are there to help you keep your place in the recording and help you recognize what comes before and after the information you are listening for. Don't use any of the words from the line after the gap in your answer, though, as they won't be correct. Here is question 22. Pause the video to consider why yellow fever and hepatitis are wrong or correct. Yellow fever is incorrect because this is something the patient mentions in the audio that they didn't have an injection for. Hepatitis is not specific enough as there are different variants, A, B, and C, and would score 0 without the inclusion of A. Be alert for distractors such as yellow fever in this question. They form part of the test to check your ability to filter the information the patient says to the essential and accurate information you need to record and which would be useful to refer back to in the future. Here is question 23. Pause the video to consider why cold sores is wrong or correct. Question 23 is correct. The candidate has correctly recorded the plural form of the noun as heard in the audio. Use the time for checking answers to check for singular and plural forms against the notes around the gap to recall if this is what you heard and make sense as a complete idea for that line of notes. Here is question 24. Pause the video to consider why mastectomy and tamoxifen treatment are wrong or correct. Tamoxifen treatment is wrong because it's uncommon to use the name of a medication with the verb underwent, whereas a type of treatment or therapy, as in the correct answer, lumpectomy, is more common. Mastectomy is also wrong. It was not said in the recording. Don't jump to conclusions about the answer without listening to the audio. While mastectomy can be a treatment pathway for a patient with breast cancer, it isn't the only one. Keep listening to hear the word or phrase that will complete the answer gap correctly. Having worked through these common mistakes OET candidates make, you should now be much clearer about how to complete your answers accurately and avoid losing marks unnecessarily. Here is some general advice to follow every time you practice listening part A or in your test. Your answers should only include the word or phrase that complete the gap. Use exactly the same wording as in the audio. Don't paraphrase or use technical language. Your answer should be short, specific, and relevant. Don't repeat words or synonyms of words from the question paper or include objective information from the patient that is not valued and wouldn't be recorded in real life by a healthcare professional. Anticipating the type of answer that fits in a gap before you listen is a good skill to use in listening tests. Is it a condition or a symptom? Is it a number? Is it a part of the body? Is it a job or a hobby? But don't make predictions from your medical knowledge. Always listen to the audio and record the details you hear. Check your spelling and grammar to check it is as accurate as possible and makes sense in the context of the words around it. Check your answers are legible. You can make notes on your paper, perhaps to act as a reminder for an answer you want to complete during the checking time at the end, but we would recommend crossing through anything that you don't want considered as part of your answer to be as clear as possible for the assessors. If you follow all of this advice, you can feel confident that you will succeed in listening part A.